At 2 a.m., Naomi Spencer's front door shattered under the weight of a police raid. Boots pounded, rifles pointed, voices barked orders like she was a criminal. But then everything stopped. Flashlights froze on the wall, reflecting off a framed FBI jacket with Naomi's name stitched in bold. In that moment, the entire room went silent. They hadn't barged into a suspect's house. They had just declared war on a federal agent. And trust me, you're going to want to know exactly what happened next. Hit subscribe now because stories like this only get deeper, darker, and more shocking from here. The night was still, the kind of dead 2 a.m. silence where even the city holds its breath. Street lamps flickered weakly, shadows stretched across cracked pavement, and inside the modest townhouse at the end of the block, Naomi Spencer was asleep on her couch, TV muttering softly into an empty room. She had fallen asleep with one arm draped across a pile of case files, the pages spilling across the floor like paper ghosts. Then it happened. The thunderclap of wood smashing against steel hinges swallowed the silence whole. Her door exploded inward, splinters scattering across the carpet as boots pounded across the threshold. "Police, get down! Get down now!" Voices thundered, overlapping, sharp with adrenaline and authority. Naomi jolted awake, heart slamming against her ribs, instinct roaring inside her before logic could even gather. She pushed herself upright, squinting into the beams of flashlights cutting her living room into chaos. 6 figures in tactical gear stormed in, rifles raised, lasers painting trembling dots across the walls like lightning bugs out of control. They didn't speak like protectors. They barked like hunters. Naomi raised her hands slowly, her pulse a war drum in her ears. "What is going on?" she demanded, voice stronger than she felt. "Shut up! On the floor, face down!" one officer barked back. Naomi's chest rose, breath caught between fury and disbelief. The floorboards, her floorboards, vibrated beneath the weight of armed strangers tearing through her home. Couch cushions ripped open, blinds knocked sideways, papers scattered under boots that trampled them without a glance. Her neighborhood had heard raids before. Shattered doors, muffled screams, neighbors whispering the next day about warrants and mistakes, bad addresses and no apologies. But Naomi had never expected it to be her turn. She lowered herself carefully, pressing her palms flat to the carpet, cheek brushing the cold floor. Yet even as she obeyed their orders, her mind was racing, not with fear of guilt, but with confusion. Why her? Why here? One officer pushed forward, his voice a snarl. "Where's Derek?" "Derek?" Naomi's cheek pressed harder into the carpet. "I live here alone. Don't lie." His boot nudged her case files across the floor. "Warrants for this address. We know he's here." Naomi's breath fractured with frustration. "Derek?" She didn't even know a Derek. It had to be a mistake. But mistakes carried consequences measured in broken lives. One younger officer swept a beam down the hallway. "Clear in here!" he shouted. Another rifled through her bookshelf, tossing picture frames and documents to the side. And then his light froze. He squinted, stilled, and the tension in the room shifted just slightly like wind catching sails. "Sarge," he called out, voice different now, uneasy. "What?" The sergeant barked from beside Naomi. "On the wall." The officer stepped aside, his flashlight fixed on the framed shadow box, hanging just above Naomi's desk. A polished, carefully preserved navy blue FBI jacket, protected behind glass. The official emblem shimmered under the beam. Across the wall, photographs of Naomi in training, graduation at Quantico, arm raised in oath, medals gleaming. "Sir, she's FBI." The words cracked like lightning. The rifles didn't lower immediately, but hesitation seeped into the room like water under the door. The sergeant stiffened, his own light landing on the insignia. A moment passed, heavy, awkward, their arrogance colliding with recognition. Naomi could feel it without lifting her head, the shift from assumed dominance to uneasy realization. Her voice sharpened against the floorboards. "That's right. Naomi Spencer, Special Agent, Counterintelligence Division. And you just kicked in the wrong damn door." Her words sliced through the chaotic breathing of 6 men who had entered ready to control everything, and suddenly realized they controlled nothing. Boots shuffled, rifles wavered, and one looked nervously to his sergeant for orders. But the sergeant said nothing, his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. Naomi pushed herself up slowly, her hands still raised but her spine straightening now, defiance written across every line of her face. Rage swirled in her chest, the fury of being treated like prey in her own home, tempered only by the satisfaction of watching their confidence dissolve. The officer nearest to her swallowed hard. His rifle tilted downward half an inch. "Ma'am, this must be a mix-up. A mix-up." Naomi's voice rang sharp in the air. Her eyes blazed. "You broke my door off its hinges at 2 a.m. with rifles pointed at my head." "That's not a mix-up. That's a violation." Shame rippled across one officer's face, then another. Their breaths thickened, regret settling like smoke. None of them expected her to be anyone beyond the assumption. A suspect, a shadow in a raid. But now she had flipped the entire room with 9 letters. FBI. The jacket shimmered quietly in its glass frame, witness to the turn of power. Naomi stood taller now, refusing the carpet, refusing the role they had thrown on her. The 6 officers who had stormed her sanctuary only moments ago looked caught somewhere between soldiers and schoolchildren, trying to calculate whether to holster their weapons or salvage their pride. Her eyes flicked from one face to another, cataloguing fear, guilt, and arrogance fighting for dominance. They had wanted her afraid. Instead, they now feared her calm. "Warrant," Naomi demanded, her voice cold steel. The sergeant cleared his throat. "Ma'am, Agent Spencer, we received credible intel tying this address to a fugitive named Derek Cole. Armed, dangerous, linked to 3 counts of homicide. We came prepared." Naomi's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Prepared? Prepared for murder, maybe. But what you conducted here was an execution waiting to happen. Did you verify this address beyond a tip scribbled on a notepad? Did you run it through dispatch? Check your databases? Or did you just suit up and decide to kick down a black woman's door at 2 a.m.? No one answered. Silence prickled. One officer shifted uneasily, lowering his rifle another inch. Naomi's voice cut again, steady and rising. "Answer me." The sergeant hesitated, then stammered. We had an address, ma'am." It was wrong," Naomi snapped. "And you breached without confirmation." Her mind hummed with the training she had endured, the endless lectures at Quantico drilled into her bones. Verify, confirm, assess threat properly. Every agent knew mistakes weren't mistakes. They were failures measured in blood. Naomi's blood could have been on this carpet tonight. Another officer, younger, spoke in nervous defense. "Look, with all respect, we didn't know this was your home." Naomi glared. "Then who lives here, officer? Say it. What did your credible intel tell you about me?" His throat worked uselessly. His gaze dropped. Naomi stepped closer, voice lowering, sharper. "You didn't know because you didn't care. You didn't expect the person at the end of this door to matter." "That's the truth." The sergeant bristled, trying to salvage authority. "Agent Spencer, if you'll allow us, we'll clear the scene and file an incident report in the morning." Naomi nearly laughed again. The audacity made smoke rise inside her chest. "Clear the scene? Like vandals sneaking away after breaking glass?" "No, Sergeant. You will sit tight. Because when the Bureau opens your file in the morning, I will make damn sure my director sees exactly how his agents could have been killed by incompetence." The weight of her words silenced them completely. Some looked at the ground. Others fumbled with their weapons, unsure whether to sling them or grip them tight. Naomi walked further into the living room, standing beneath her frame jacket. The very jacket they had seen, the one that had frozen them. She stared at it a moment, then turned back, letting her silence enforce what she didn't yet need to say. "Why this address?" she asked finally, her tone quieter but heavier. "Who signed off? Give me a name." The sergeant hesitated, then muttered, "The tip came directly from Organized Crime Division. A CI gave the address. Said Derek was hiding here." Naomi's brow furrowed. Her training instincts sharpened instantly. Organized Crime Confidential Informant. A name like Derek Cole flagged bright in her brain. She knew those reports. She'd handled parallel cases. And something was off, grotesquely off. "You kicked in a door." Naomi took one deliberate step closer. "With rifles drawn. On the word of a CI? No surveillance? No secondary verification?" The weight of her accusation flattened the room. She inhaled slowly, the fury oxygenating her control. Then she crouched, gathered her fallen case files from the floor one by one, each page now crumpled with the bootprints of men who had called themselves precise. She stacked them neatly, stood again, her hands steady. "These were my files," she said softly. "Counterintelligence, Long-term sting I've been running quietly for 9 months. You may have just compromised it. And all because you charged him blind." The sergeant paled. The men exchanged glances, unease mushrooming into realization. They hadn't just invaded an FBI agent's home. They might have burned intelligence that outweighed their entire careers. Naomi let the silence deepen until their shame suffocated them. Then she spoke again, each word deliberate. "You made assumptions. You acted careless. And you put my life at risk for nothing. Look at me. I could be in a body bag right now because you didn't care enough to double-check a file." Her words landed like gunfire. Finally, the youngest officer whispered, almost apologetic. We're sorry, Mom." The sergeant cut him a glare, but Naomi caught it, contrition bleeding through arrogance. She inhaled deeply. Her spine ached from the tension, her muscles still shaking from being startled awake at muzzle point. But no weakness bled through her voice. She turned to her bookshelf, plucked a photo frame the officers had tossed aside, and brushed dust from its cracked glass. Her and her mother, smiling on Naomi's day of swearing in as an agent. Pride alive in their eyes, Naomi set it gently on the desk again. "You don't get to walk away with sorry," she said firmly. "Not when there are women who died because of raids just like this. Not when silence buries them. Tonight you wanted me to be faceless, and tonight you discovered my face is one you can't erase." Her words carved them into place. Not one officer moved, not one dared speak. The jacket on the wall gleamed under the flashlight beams, no longer a quiet decoration but a judge hovering over them all. The clock on the wall ticked past 2:30 a.m., its quiet rhythm louder now in the collapsed hush of the wrecked living room. Torn cushions lay scattered, papers boot-stamped, her door hanging twisted on its hinges. The chaos screamed violation, but Naomi herself stood centered, presence like a blade leveled at the men who had stormed her life. They fidgeted like a squad of rookies caught cheating on an exam. Rifles half-slung, breaths shallow. No one wanted to meet her eyes. "Sit," Naomi commanded. The sergeant blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said sit. All of you, couch chairs now." Her tone left no space for negotiation. Training and fury fused in her voice, commanding without bullets but with an authority none could ignore. Slowly, begrudgingly, the 6 officers sat. Kevlar creaked against leather cushions. Boots thudded onto floors they had practically destroyed minutes earlier. Naomi paced across the wreckage like an interrogator circling suspects, her FBI instincts sharpening. "Organized Crime Division fed you this tip," she pressed. "Which unit?" The sergeant hesitated. "OCD Task Force East, CI known only as Henderson, classified Level 2 asset." Naomi frowned. Henderson. She remembered that name. She had seen it in redacted intel files, mostly unreliable, constantly bargaining for lighter sentences by delivering crumbs dressed up as bread. Half-truths, quarter-lies, and no one in their right mind would execute a no-knock raid solely off Henderson's word. Yet they had. "Why Henderson?" Naomi asked, pinning the sergeant with her gaze. "Who approved the warrant?" "This isn't standard." The sergeant shifted. His throat clicked. The chief signed it with urgency. We were told not to delay." Naomi stopped walking. Her pulse chilled. Not delay. Not confirm. Not even surveil. Urgency meant pressure. Pressure meant someone wanted this raid to happen regardless of risk. Naomi's training whispered through her memory. Patterns matter. Coincidences are rarely coincidences. She took a slow step closer to the sergeant. "This wasn't a mistake," she said quietly. "This was orchestration. Someone in organized crime wanted a show, and you were their blunt instrument." The younger officer, the one who had whispered his apology before, finally spoke, shame and curiosity mingling. "Why you? Why your name, your address?" And Naomi's jaw clenched. Her mind raced back over the last 9 months of her own assignment, tracking the hidden web of an international laundering network that had snaked its way into union bosses, politicians, corporate billionaires. She had been working quietly, silently to gather threads for the Bureau. Only a handful of people even knew her leads, unless someone powerful knew she was too close, and used a bogus CI tip to cut her off by force. Her stomach sank as the thought solidified. She wasn't collateral damage. She was the target. She looked directly at the sergeant. Did anyone tell you this raid was linked indirectly to federal interests? Did they mention my name before breaching? The sergeant admitted after a swallow. We were only told address verified. Fugitive inside. Proceed with maximum caution. Nothing else. Naomi exhaled slowly, fury pulsing inside her ribs. Somebody had intentionally painted her home as a kill zone. She turned toward her desk, gathering her case files again, stacking them neatly though her fingers shook. These pages contained months of surveillance logs, mapping of shell accounts, whispered leads from foreign operatives. If this raid had burned them, if Henderson's lie had been designed to compromise her specifically, her investigation was already flagged. Behind her, the officers sat trapped, caged by their own shame as much as her authority. She turned back sharply. Names, Sergeant. Who gave the operational order? Exact timestamp, exact phrasing. He shifted again, sweat finally gathering at his temple. Deputy Chief Aaron Fillmore. 11:47 p.m. Told us we had permission to execute and not to wait for bureau coordination. His words were, "By dawn, this fugitive needs to be in cuffs or in the ground." Naomi's spine straightened. She wrote the words into memory like etching into stone. In cuffs or in the ground. And with a wrong address poorly verified? That meant someone wanted a corpse delivered. She was supposed to have been that corpse. She walked closer, staring into the sergeant's confused eyes. "Congratulations. You and your team were just turned into assassins for hire. Someone set you up to kill an FBI agent in her own home. If I'd been slower to raise my hand, slower to speak, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be another headline buried in spin." The men flinched. No one argued, because deep down in the pounding guilt on their faces, they already believed her. Naomi's fury hushed into clarity. Her voice dropped so low it was nearly intimate. "You raid neighborhoods like mine often, don't you? Faces like mine, doors like mine." No one responded. Their silence was the confession. The youngest officer whispered nearly to himself, "My God, we almost—" "Yes." Naomi cut him off instantly. "You almost." The jacket on the wall shimmered again under faint light, judge and jury to her truth. Naomi drew a deep breath, pressing her palms onto the back of her sofa, steadying herself as the storm inside settled into focus. She realized the raid wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Henderson's rotten intel, Fillmore's urgency, the broken door at 2 a.m. It was all a thread she was meant to tug. And tugging it would unravel a chain leading deeper than these 6 shaken men could imagine. She turned her gaze back on them, steel flooding her words. "You will file your report, but I'll file mine first. Every boot print in this house will be accountability. And by the time I'm finished, you'll remember this raid not as your shame, but as the night you stumbled into something too big to hide." Her voice cut the air. None dared speak again. Naomi stood in the ruins of her home, the jacket above her glowing almost sacred, and silently promised her mother, herself, and every silent headline buried in ashes. The truth was going to come out. And if someone inside the system had tried to erase her tonight, their mistake was leaving her alive to tell the story. Naomi crossed her arms and fixed her eyes on the squad as if she'd handpicked them for interrogation. The tension in the room was no longer about weapons. It was gravity, and she controlled the center of orbit. "You think this ends with you walking out of here, brushing splinters off your boots, filing a half-truth report?" Naomi's voice rang sharp and steady. "No. You're staying until Internal Affairs takes your statements. Your words tonight will become evidence, because this raid wasn't an accident. It was a bullet aimed at me." The sergeant started to protest, but she silenced him with one raised palm. "Don't," she said flatly, "because right now the only thing separating you from federal obstruction is my patience. And believe me, that patience is thin." They shifted uneasily, armored vests suddenly feeling like coffins. Naomi could see shame pin their shoulders down. For years they were the storm at other people's doors. Tonight the storm had met its mirror, and it didn't like what it saw. She drew in a long breath, pacing behind them. "Do you know what keeps me awake at night?" she asked softly, almost conversationally. "Not the cases, not the criminals. The rot inside our own institutions. The ones who think they can bend procedures, bend men like you into their weapons, to erase those of us who are inconvenient." Her words draped over them like chains. Even the youngest officer nodded faintly, before glancing down in fearful silence. Naomi laid a single case file onto the table, flipping it open. Numbers filled the page, bank transfers, coded accounts. She tapped it firmly. This is what I've been building. A network that strings from New York to Singapore. Shell companies laundering money through contractors, tied to men like Fillmore. You see why they wanted to bury me? Because I was about to tie Derek Cole to more than just street crime. He's the courier. He moves stolen secrets, not just guns. And someone upstairs doesn't want that going public. So they fed you Henderson's poison, pointed you here and said, solve it by dawn. The sergeant wiped his palm across his mouth, pale now. Are you saying, Deputy Chief Fillmore, Naomi cut in, used you? Yes, you were never hunting Derek. They sent you after me. One officer rubbed his forehead. Another muttered, Christ. Naomi leaned over them, her shadow stretching. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit. You're going to give me every detail, every word, every inflection Fillmore used that night. And when you do make peace with this, you've crossed the line. You're witnesses now. They looked at one another miserably, but no one argued, because the truth, grounded in her voice, rang too clear to deny. Naomi sat at her desk, pulled out a legal pad, and began writing as they stammered details. The sergeant gave times, names, phrases. The younger officer recited the exact line about the fugitive being in cuffs or in the ground. Each word was a nail in a coffin Fillmore was building for himself. By 3:40 a.m. the pad was filled with scribbles. Naomi set down her pen, satisfied. One officer broke the silence, voice cracked low. Agent Spencer, what happens to us? Naomi closed the pad, sliding it aside. That depends, she said, on whether you stand behind the truth or crawl back to protect your chief. Tonight you broke into the wrong house, my house. By dawn, the Bureau will know it. The sergeant exhaled heavily, spine bent in surrender. Arrogance had been stripped from him like bark from a tree. We'll cooperate, he muttered. Naomi watched him carefully, measuring. Finally, she nodded. Good. Then maybe you'll walk away with something salvageable. She stood again, moving to the fractured door. Cold air filtered through the shattered threshold. She stared out at the empty street, a place so common it hid secrets in plain sight. She felt the truth gnawing. Fillmore had escalated. What he feared wasn't her existence, it was her voice. And tonight, that voice had survived against his will. She turned back to the officers. Her tone softened but sharpened at the core. Do you realize how many daughters never make it out of nights like this? How many ghosts float through your paperwork because they weren't wearing a badge to scare you into listening? The youngest officer's eyes glistened briefly. He whispered, Too many. Naomi swallowed her own rising anger, forcing herself to focus. Exactly. I won't be one of them. And I won't let them bury this like another mistake. The room sat crushed under truth. Finally, Naomi pulled her jacket from the wall. The same one that had silenced all their bravado. She slipped it over her shoulders, the weight settling like a mantle, the emblem shining proud. She turned toward them, taller somehow with it on. This ends here for you, she declared, but it begins here for me. Because if Fillmore thinks this raid broke me, he has no idea what's coming. And as her watch ticked past 4 a.m., Naomi Spencer knew she wasn't just cleaning her broken door tonight. She was gearing up for war. The dawn broke pale across the skyline, painting the street outside in muted gold. Naomi stood framed by the wreckage of her own door, shoulders squared beneath the FBI jacket she had reclaimed from the wall. Behind her, 6 officers, men who had poured into her home like wolves hours ago, now sat hollowed, their authority stripped, their futures dangling on the weight of their own statements. Naomi's pen tapped once against the pad of notes she had taken from them. Each phrase another rung on the ladder. She would climb straight to Fillmore's office. Their raid hadn't silenced her. It had given her ammunition. She turned to them one last time. Leave my house. Wait for the call from Internal Affairs, because that will come by noon, and when it does, tell the truth. Don't spin this. Don't save Fillmore. If you lie, you'll be exposed with him. If you're honest, maybe you walk out untouched. Your choice. They rose slowly one by one, the scrape of boots against broken wood echoing louder than their earlier shouts. Heads ducked, arrogance gone, they left like men leaving a funeral. Naomi watched the squad cars roll away. She let the silence swallow them, then closed her eyes. For a moment she felt the exhaustion crack at her ribs. She could have died tonight, killed by mistake or by someone's design. The thought rattled her, but beneath the fear was iron. They had failed to erase her, and failure for enemies like Fillmore meant vulnerability. She glanced down at her case files again, at the names and numbers littering every page. Derek Cole might be an assassin or a scapegoat, maybe both. Henderson was a pawn, but Fillmore? He was no pawn. He was playing chess with people's lives. Naomi tightened her jacket, then dialed a familiar number. A sleepy voice answered. "Spencer, it's 4:30, you all right?" Her tone was steady steel. "I need a secure line. Now. We have rot in organized crime, and it reached into my living room tonight. This isn't an isolated screw-up. It's a kill order wearing a badge. We take this up the chain immediately." There was silence on the line, then quickened typing. "Tell me everything," her colleague whispered. Naomi looked around the ruins of her home. Her door cracked wide to the cold. Everything spoke of violation, but she refused to stand in ruins. She would rebuild, and she would make these men answer. Her voice sharpened into the receiver. "This doesn't end with me. And if Fillmore doesn't know it yet, he will soon. Because when you kick in the wrong woman's door, you don't just leave footprints. You spark a fire." Naomi hung up, grabbed the jacket tighter, and stepped into the morning light. The system had wanted her silent, erased at 2 a.m. Instead, she was still here, alive, louder than ever, carrying their mistake like a weapon. Tonight had ended, but the war was just beginning.